This ancient painting hides a secret that the history of art tried to silence for centuries. Tonight we will not only observe a masterpiece hanging silently on a museum wall, we will step into the very moment when the artist, surrounded by doubt and obsession, left his soul trapped forever within the canvas. Listen closely, because every shadow, every color, every silent detail whispers a forbidden truth waiting to be revealed. Welcome to Museum Mysteries.
There are paintings that are not only seen, they are felt like a prayer frozen in time, such as Winter Landscape, the painting that Caspar David Friedrich created around the year 1811, one of the most moving meditations on faith, solitude, and the human soul ever captured on canvas. Seemingly simple, the work depicts a snowy landscape where a fragile and weary man kneels before a crucifix, surrounded by a small group of fir trees. In the background, through the fog barely visible, rises the silhouette of a Gothic church. There is no movement, no crowd, no visible drama, only a moment suspended, a breath between life and eternity. Yet beneath that frozen silence beats one of the deepest discourses of Romanticism, the union between man and the divine through nature, the hope that endures even in the winter of the soul. Caspar David Friedrich was born in 1774 in Greifswald, a small Baltic port city, and from childhood, he learned that nature was not just a backdrop but a living force that reflected the states of the spirit. His childhood was marked by tragedy, among them the death of his mother and his younger brother, who drowned before his eyes while trying to save him. That trauma accompanied him always, turning his art into a continuous dialogue with death, memory, and redemption. In Dresden, where he trained as an artist, Friedrich moved away from decorative painting and sought to capture the invisible emotion, thought, transcendence. For him, every tree, every cloud, and every stone were symbols of the human soul. His brush did not copy nature, it interpreted it as a mirror of the divine. Winter Landscape belongs to the most introspective stage of his career. In it, Friedrich abandons grand panoramic views for an intimate scene where the essential lies not in the vastness of the landscape, but in the silent communion between man and his surroundings. The composition is built with astonishing symbolic precision. In the foreground, the man whom some scholars believe represents the artist himself appears kneeling before a wooden cross anchored in the snow. Beside him rest two crutches, symbols of a defeated body, of weakness overcome or surrendered to faith. The firs that flank the cross are young. Their green branches contrast with the inert white ground, suggesting the promise of resurrection. In the background, the Gothic church emerges through the mist as a spiritual destination, a beacon toward which the entire scene points. Friedrich thus constructs a symbolic itinerary: man in the physical world, the cross as redemption, and the church as eternity. In its apparent stillness, the painting is full of inner movement. The diagonals of the terrain and the direction of the man's gaze guide the viewer toward the distance, as if the composition invited a spiritual ascent from earth to heaven. The snow, far from being mere decoration, acts as a metaphor for purity and also for death, covering everything with its silent mantle. The grayish atmosphere of the sky is neither dark nor bright, but intermediate, a twilight suggesting transition between earthly life and final illumination. Light in Friedrich is never naturalistic. It is a moral force, a revelation. Here its uncertain origin, perhaps from the horizon behind the church, intensifies the feeling of faint hope of salvation amid the cold. The message of the work can be read as a parable of the human soul facing the winter of existence. The man has left his crutches behind, his body may be weak, but his spirit has found support in faith. It is an act of surrender, but not of defeat. It is the moment when the earthly yields to the eternal. Some art historians interpret this gesture as a metaphor for Friedrich's own life, who went through a personal and religious crisis during those years. Illness, loneliness, and melancholy were constant companions of his life, and this painting seems to condense his vision. Faith is not an escape from pain, but a way to accept and transcend it. The symbolism of the natural elements reinforces this spiritual reading. The fir trees, resilient even in the harshest winters, represent hope that survives adversity. The church, visible through the mist, symbolizes the promise of eternal life. The snow-covered path, suggests the difficult passage of the soul toward redemption. Taken together, the painting becomes a visual meditation on death and faith. But Friedrich, faithful to his style, avoids sentimentality. There are no tears, no dramatics, only the silent dignity of the believer contemplating the absolute. As for its material history, winter landscape was rediscovered in the late 20th century, after remaining in private collections for more than 100 years. In 1987, it was acquired by the National Gallery in London, where it is currently exhibited. There exists another almost identical version in the Museum of Art and Culture in Dortmund, titled Winter Landscape with Church, which has generated debate over which is the original. Technical studies from the National Gallery suggest that the London version, more detailed and refined, is likely the first. X-ray and microscopic analyses revealed that Friedrich modified several elements during the painting process. He changed the position of the crutches, adjusted the direction of the fir branches, and softened the outline of the church. Everything indicates he was seeking perfect symbolic balance, where nothing was left to chance. Unlike other artists of his era, Friedrich did not immediately sign or explain his paintings. He believed art should speak directly to the viewer's soul. That ambiguity made many critics of his time consider him enigmatic, even disturbing. Some accused him of exaggerating mysticism and turning landscape into a religious sermon. Others, more attuned to his poetic language, saw in him the great visionary of German Romanticism. Over time, his reputation shifted from controversial to legendary. Today, he is recognized as the painter who transformed landscape into an inner experience. In the historical context, Winter Landscape was painted a few years after the Napoleonic Wars, a period when Germany was living through a spiritual and national crisis. Many artists felt the need to reconnect with their roots, with the land, with faith. Friedrich, deeply Lutheran, expressed that search not through heroes or battles, but through silent landscapes. In them, man appears tiny but never insignificant, a spark of consciousness amid the infinite. In that sense, his art can also be read as a political and philosophical response to the rationalism of the Enlightenment. For him, truth did not reside in reason but in emotion, in the direct experience of the sacred. Modern criticism has revisited Winter Landscape from diverse perspectives. Some authors interpret it as a spiritual self-portrait, a confession of faith disguised as a landscape. Others emphasize its symbolic character. Winter as a metaphor for the end of life, the cross as redemption, the firs as rebirth. There are even those who read it from a psychological angle, seeing in the abandonment of the crutches an act of liberation of the ego and total surrender to mystery. In any of these readings, the painting maintains its hypnotic power. Its silence is not emptiness, but emotional density. From a technical standpoint, the restorations carried out by the National Gallery focused on cleaning the yellowed varnish and stabilizing the original pigments, restoring the painting's pearl gray luminosity and delicate tonal balance. Studies showed that Friedrich used a light primer base and thin layers of glazes to create the atmospheric transparency of his style. Nothing in the work is abrupt. Each transition between light and shadow seems breathed, as if the canvas itself exhaled the stillness of winter. Despite not having provoked explicit scandals, Winter Landscape challenged the norms of its time. Instead of glorifying strength, it celebrated fragility. Instead of painting human power, it exalted surrender. That inversion of values was, in itself, a revolutionary act. Friedrich taught that greatness lies not in mastering nature, but in listening to it. His message remains relevant. In a world obsessed with speed and productivity, this painting invites us to pause, to contemplate, to accept silence as a form of wisdom. To look at it today is to enter a space where time dissolves. The viewer becomes a witness to the instant when man and landscape merge, when spirit detaches from matter. There is no dramatism, only a calm that hurts and consoles at the same time. It is the visual echo of an unwritten verse. When everything seems to die, life still remains. When the world freezes, the soul can still bloom. Friedrich achieves what few artists have, turning emptiness into presence, snow into prayer, solitude into communion. Upon leaving the museum, one carries the feeling of having witnessed something intimate and sacred. Winter landscape does not impose, it whispers. It does not seek immediate astonishment, but quiet reflection. It is a mirror in which each person can see his or her own inner winter, their own act of faith. Caspar David Friedrich, the painter who made the landscape a cathedral, leaves us here his most human message. Even in the deepest cold, there is a light that does not go out, a hope that does not die, an invisible force that invites us to keep believing. Caspar David Friedrich did not paint winter as a dead season, but as a state of the soul. In winter landscape, the cold does not destroy, it purifies. In that white stillness lies a form of truth, understood only by those who have known the silence of loss or the calm after suffering. Every element of the painting is arranged as if responding to a secret logic. The kneeling man represents the spirit shedding the body. The fallen crutches suggest the abandonment of physical limitations, the surrender of flesh before the eternal. The young, upright trees indicate that even amid ice, life pushes forward. The distant church marks the direction of the soul toward its final destination, and the gray, diffuse sky covers everything with a veil of eternity. Friedrich was a master at hiding meanings beneath apparent simplicity. His art is not narrative, it is symbolic. The absence of additional figures reinforces isolation, but also communion. There are no spectators, no witnesses. Only the man and his God. The landscape becomes a temple, and the snow an altar. This mystical conception of the natural environment was deeply innovative. Until then, landscape painting had been decorative or documentary. Friedrich transformed it into a spiritual experience, a path of contemplation. In this sense, he was a precursor of visual existentialism. Every element of the world reflects the inner state of the human being. What makes winter landscapes special is its balance between death and hope. In Friedrich's winter, there is cold, yes, but also a promise of rebirth. The man is not dying, he is awakening to another reality. The cross before him, carved in simple wood, does not speak of suffering, but of redemption. It is the symbol of transition, the passage from pain to peace, and the church in the distance is not a far-off building, but the representation of the spiritual home. Everything in the painting points toward that vanishing point, where the soul finds rest. This symbolism was misunderstood by many contemporary critics. In his time, the public expected heroic landscapes, cheerful scenes, or precise representations of nature. Friedrich, instead, offered silence, faith, and melancholy. For that reason, for decades his work was considered somber or even morbid. It was not until the late 19th century that its true scope was understood. Philosophers like Nietzsche and symbolist poets saw in his landscapes a depth that went beyond religion, an echo of the human metaphysical quest. Within the Romantic context, Friedrich occupied a solitary place. While other artists glorified the power of reason or the beauty of youth, he ventured into mist and twilight. He did not paint heroes, but pilgrims. He did not celebrate life, he meditated on it. In this sense, winter landscape is a perfect synthesis of his artistic philosophy. Man before mystery, human smallness before the absolute. His paintings do not seek to dominate nature, but to converse with it. Every mountain, every tree, every ray of light are interlocutors of the divine. The rediscovery of this work in the 20th century sparked a new wave of studies. The National Gallery version was analyzed with infrared rays that revealed significant changes beneath the surface. Friedrich had altered the position of the human figure several times, seeking the exact point where his posture would express surrender without despair. He also modified the sky's luminosity, adding layers of glaze that blur the boundary between earth and heaven, as if wishing to erase the frontier between the material and the spiritual. This technique, based on the superposition of transparent layers, creates the illusion of living atmosphere, of breath in the frozen air. The second version, preserved in Dortmund, shows subtle but revealing differences. There, the figure still holds the crutches, and the environment is more barren, more earthly. Some historians think it could have been a preliminary study, while the London version would be the spiritual conclusion, the moment after surrender, the acceptance of mystery. In that transition between one and the other, we perceive Friedrich's evolution, his passage from physical observation to transcendental meditation. Though never the source of public scandal, some scholars have seen in Winter Landscape a form of silent rebellion. In a world increasingly dominated by Enlightenment reason and materialism, Friedrich painted faith as an act of resistance. His landscape is not a religious illustration in the academic style, but an intimate affirmation of the invisible. This personal spirituality, without dogmas or hierarchies, was almost subversive. The painter does not need a visible church because he finds it in the landscape. He needs no priests because man and nature speak directly with God. That idea, as simple as it is radical, made Friedrich a modern mystic. The absence of vibrant color in the work also holds meaning. White dominates the composition, not as emptiness, but as fullness. In Christian symbolism, white represents purification and grace. Covering the world, snow erases the traces of sin and prepares the earth for a new beginning. Thus, winter becomes a prelude to resurrection. Friedrich turns cold into hope. Silence is not death, but promise. From a psychological standpoint, the painting can be seen as an inner reconciliation. The man, tired and alone, has reached the end of his quest. He no longer struggles against adversity. He accepts it. That acceptance is not resignation, but wisdom. The abandonment of the crutches does not imply defeat, but faith that something greater sustains him. In that surrender lies freedom. Friedrich, who knew depression and loss, projects into this figure his own understanding of suffering. He himself said, "Art must come from the heart of man and speak to the heart of man." Winter Landscape is precisely that, a silent conversation between two souls recognizing each other in the snow. The impact of the work on later generations has been immense. It inspired symbolists, expressionists, and even filmmakers of the 20th century. Directors such as Andrei Tarkovsky and Terrence Malick have cited Friedrich's influence in their way of filming nature as a mirror of the soul. In their films, as in the German painter's works, light becomes language and landscape becomes prayer. It has also been the subject of theological and philosophical interpretations, viewing it as a visual representation of Lutheran faith, based on the direct relationship between the individual and God without intermediaries. Conservation studies show that the surface of the painting retains its original texture, without invasive restorations. The varnish, which had darkened over time, was carefully removed to restore its ethereal tone. The result is a work that seems suspended in air, where every grain of snow glimmers delicately. Conservators have noted that Friedrich used extremely fine brushes to paint the fir branches and a mixture of natural pigments with linseed oil to achieve the softness of the sky. That technical precision reflects his devotion. Painting, for him, was a form of prayer. In recent years, Winter Landscape has gained new meaning in contemporary context. Many see in it a reflection on human fragility before nature, an ecological warning ahead of its time. The smallness of man before the frozen landscape reminds us that we are guests, not owners of the world. Friedrich, unknowingly, anticipated the sense of loss and reverence we feel today amid environmental crisis. His message 2 centuries later resounds more urgently. Without spirituality, man freezes inside. Contemplating this painting is a transformative experience, not only for its beauty, but for the feeling of purity it awakens. Before it, inner noise fades and everything reduces to the essential: a man, a cross, the snow, the light. It reminds us that true greatness does not lie in visible triumphs, but in the serenity of one who accepts his smallness and still keeps believing. Friedrich teaches us that there are winters that do not kill but cleanse, that in the deepest silence, the voice of the eternal can be heard, and that even amid the snow, when the world seems asleep, something within us keeps breathing, waiting for dawn. Thus, Winter Landscape reveals itself as a work of universal faith. Religion and time do not matter. Everyone recognizes in it the longing for something beyond matter. Friedrich turned winter into a metaphor for hope. He painted the instant when the soul surrenders not out of defeat but out of love. And in that surrender, he found immortality.